The second sample, I'm just doing some decorative stitching, some other uses for the triple cover. And on the piece that I will be showing, I have put some heavier purple thread in a looper. So that way I'm using really the wrong side of that fabric to show some of the decorative stitching. On this other fabric, I have used the shrink fabric underneath and sewed it on there. And then with the steam iron, got some of those bubbles on the forming on the fabric. And then this gold and black one. This one was sewn on water-soluble stabilizer with heavier thread in a looper, and that gave us kind of made fabric just after soaking the stabilizer out. If I go straight lines, I could use a fabric guide, a little seam guide on the actually the quilting guide to help me to do straight lines and parallel lines. But then if I do curves, that is when the curve foot becomes handy. So I have two versions of it, the original metal one and then the clear one. Either one would work, but it makes it easier to go by the curves when I use the curve foot. Here's some examples on actual projects that I've done. There's a crazy patch that I sewed over the seams, the cover stitch with very thick thread in a looper. Again, the looper we can put the heavier thread. Then this blue and white one, that is from the heirloom baby quilt that I had used the needle side to piece the right side. But I have blue thread in a looper and this lightweight batiste, it kind of shines through a little shadow work on that design. And here's just a little Serger technique bag that I had used the triple cover just for quilting. And also it attached the zipper that way, the top stitch over the zipper in the pocket. And you see that one even on a handle, I had covered the sides of that webbing with this triple cover stitch. So it had lots of other uses other than just the hemming that I used earlier. And I tend to use it more on decorative than actual construction sewing.
What else can we do with this stitch? Of course, has another side of it, which is the looper side. And on this back, this is one of the Serger project classes that we have done. In the front, there's a pocket that the flap is kind of a crazy patch stitching, but instead of using the sewing machine decorative stitches, we use the Serger with the heavier thread in a looper. So that was done with the triple cover. I was doing some crazy patch over the weekend, and I was using the same technique. So on these pieces of fabric, these are upholstery fabric, so I did not sew a traditional seam. I just gonna overlap them about 1/8 inch on both pieces, and first tack them down in the sewing machine, and then I sewed it with the Serger. I sewed it from the wrong side, so I had used the kind of a heavier stabilizer interfacing, and that way I had those marks, so I was able to use those as my stitching guide when I stitch it from this from the wrong side. So I had put really thick thread on my looper on that one. So again, you need to do a test that your stitch length is not too short. That's about the shortest I think I could put on this stitch. So other things what I have done, kind of just to play the little samples. This piece I just sewed kind of a wavy lines on a piece of a water-soluble stabilizer. That heavier kind of stabilizer that is used for freestanding lace and embroidery. Sewed over, and then just to wash the stabilizer out. So now I have kind of a fabric. So I could make a scarf or kind of a faux knit in this way. In this piece, this is just a little bit heavier fabric again, but I sewed it on from the wrong side up. And I used, you can kind of see that was a Floriani, I think it's now called sew shrink fabric. Similar kind of ones, Texture Magic. Those shrinking fabrics, I laid it on my wrong side of one fabric and then marked the lines on the wrong side. Actually just marked a couple lines and used the seam guide for that to keep them parallel. And then I had a little bit heavier thread in a looper, sewed lines on it. And then when I used the steam iron to shrink the fabric, I got a little three-dimensional look for this one. So it can be used totally just as a decorative. So I'm setting my machine with a little bit heavier thread in a looper, and I will demonstrate that one. So what foot should I use? Of course, I could use my clear foot, I could use the narrow foot, but if I want to do curves, again, you know, everyone who knows my sewing and searching, I like different feet. So for my favorite for curved lines would be the curved foot, because it is a lot shorter, makes it easier to go around the curves. Other thing on the curves might help to have your foot press a little bit lower, it makes it easier to go around the curves. So the curved foot comes two ways. The original one was the metal one, and now there's a newer one that is a clear one. So either one of these would work just fine. So let me put the clear one because it's a newer one. One of the things about these clear feet is, actually let me take it out and I show, because of the plastic, we can't have the slit like on the metal one. Some of the metal feet, if I take the standard foot, there's a little slit that the thread could go through when I change the feet. This one, that little slit is closed. And actually on this one, the metal one, that is also closed. Why am I pointing this out? If I had a tail that was still tangled up, I would need to kind of clip that tail because it'll get stuck otherwise onto the foot. So mine, I just kind of pulled these threads out when I rethreaded my machine, so I have them kind of sitting out this way that they are not in a chain. That way then when I start stitching, they're not gonna get caught into the foot. So that's just the kind of looking on the different feet. How did I do those straight lines? Mentioned that there is a quilt guide, and this one has a little green cover for it, and it says that for the model BLES8, which was the Ovation. The Ovation and Triumph, we can put this quilt guide. There's a little place in the back of the shank, a little hole, and there's a screw behind that I can put that quilt guide on it, and that way I don't have to do all the markings on the parallel lines. I would just use the quilt guide. Just a little tip. It's the same one as works on your Baby Lock and Brother sewing machines. So it's just a different packaging, but it's the same one. So I have now set my Serger with a little bit heavier. That was actually Designer 6, which is a thread no longer available. Pearl Crown Rayon is a kind of similar one on that one, or the Madeira Decora. Because my heavy thread is in a looper, I need to put my fabric wrong side up, because that way my pretty threads will be underneath. Of course, I could use the needle side as my decorative stitch too, but this time my heavy thread is underneath, so I'll put it there. As a reminder, I need to start to sew on the fabric. So we need to have fabric in the beginning. We can sew off the edge, but we need to start on the fabric. Let me get those needle threads out of the way now that we are past that one. So let's just get them. There we go. So I can now rotate the fabric. I can go slight curves. So how would I pivot? Because now I have 3 needles, so I can't pivot needles down. Well, on the cover stitch, it had actually pivot needles up. So I would kind of just to lift it up in there, pivot a little bit in there, and continue. So I can go somewhat around. Manual has a really good description for that one. If I put those really heavy threads in the looper, then you may need to bypass that thread delivery area on that, or not thread delivery, but the threading ports. So on my really heavy thread on that crazy patch, I had bypassed that area, and I also bypassed the tension area on my machine. So now I'm at the edge. If I want to run off the edge, if I do it properly, I will lengthen my stitch, loosen my stitch tension and lengthen my stitch length all the way to 4, and then just let it run off. I'm not pulling and pulling it, so that way I can do that nice chain. And let me just clip that thread tail out. There we go. So here are my little squiggly lines that I had done with this heavier thread in a looper. I had my stitch length about 3 millimeters. If I wanted this to be a little bit closer together, I could have them a little bit closer. Let me put it about maybe 2.5. And I put my tension back to 5. Okay, this is the time that you may need to have your tension in the needles even a little bit more. When I was using that really heavy thread, that is why my needle tension was at 6 in the beginning, because that's what I had just recently been doing. Again, I'm just gonna put my fabric underneath the foot. over my previous stitch in there. Okay, let me lengthen the stitch length, loosen my tension so I can run off the edge. So I had a little bit of a shorter stitch length on this one, and I tightened the needle tension so I have a little bit more coverage. So that is how we can do just the decorative stitches, whether it is straight rows or just to squiggly lines.
For the sample 3, we're gonna do another technique with the triple cover. Really, I could use this with the narrow cover or the wide cover, or even with a chain stitch. We can gather fabric with the cover stitch, the same way as we can do ruffles on the overlock side. So if we put the stitch length all the way to 4, we get the most gathers, and then the differential feed all the way to 2. So in this case, I have an image on the top that shows some of the samples that are not very well done. They're kind of a little bit crooked because they were done on a camera. So that purple thread is the one that I'll be showing in my live video for it. But the bonnet on the bottom, that was the actual baby bonnet that I had done with this technique. So I had sewn 3 rows of the triple cover stitches and gathered those 3 rows. So this piece of fabric was just a rectangular piece of batiste. And then when I gathered it, it made this kind of nice little ruffled edge and a little baby bonnet. And I made a little serger lace in the edge. I had used the pearl crown rayon thread on a looper for this one. So this one we can use for gathering fabric. And when I do multiple rows, it looks like a Serger Smocking. And again, when I made this cover, it was done with my old Evolve machine. That time we didn't have that narrow cover foot. So now that we have that little narrow cover stitch foot, it makes it easier to get those rows more even. So I would definitely use that one now that if I did this bonnet again.
Okay, what else could we do with the triple cover? Really, this technique could be used with the wide cover and narrow cover, but I like using the triple cover, and that is Serger Smocking. Smocking is normally done traditionally by hand when you click a fabric and then sew stitches on it. There are some sewing machine techniques for that one, but we can also do that one at the Serger. So this time I have just a strip of fabric, really lightweight fabric, and for this technique I like using the narrow cover foot because that allows me to go easier right next to each other of those rows because I want to sew multiple rows. Well, this foot that I was using, I mentioned earlier that some of these feet, we don't have this little slot to get these threads out. And this curve foot was one of those. So my foot is kind of stuck. Well, how do I get my foot out of there? Because it's all tangled up with my Serger tail. Well, here's one little tip. If I put my foot back in place, there's a couple ways I can release these stitches from the stitch finger. One of the ways is what I'm going to do on a little bit later sample when we pull the threads towards me, and then we can get it that way. The other way is I'm going to just get hold of that Serger tail behind there. Sorry, can't get my hands behind there. It just wants to go around. There we go. So I'm going to keep hold on to this tail, and I have my pressure foot up, and my needles are all the way up. Normally with the hand wheel, we always rotate it going towards us. This is the only time I can go backwards, because if I do backwards half the turn, meaning I'm going to put these needles down, it'll release those stitches around from my looper, and that then I can pull them free. So important is first that my needles are all the way up, my pressure foot is up, and then I'm going to rotate the hand wheel backwards. Just enough to have my needles all the way down. Not anymore, just that half a turn. And then I can take this little thread tail and pull it behind, and it just releases it from the loopers. Works in any Serger and works it same way in the overlock side also. I'm going to rotate my hand wheel towards me again to lift my needles up. And now if I clip these thread tails, I can take my foot out, and it's not caught up on that little slot. So that was just a little tip on how to get these feet out when we do the cover stitch. So I'm going to put this cover chain foot in the machine. That is the very narrow one. And this time I will sew rows of stitches on this lightweight fabric. Then lightweight fabric will gather the best because I'm gonna pleat this fabric. So we can use the differential feed to gather fabric on a cover stitch side too. We were doing on earlier classes the rough linen with the overlock side, but the cover stitch works the same way. Same techniques. We put the differential feed all the way to 2. That was the lever on the right side of the machine. And the stitch length the longest. That's when I get the most gathers. And I put my needle tension back to 5 as it was before. And then I have put my pressure foot pressure back to normal. If I put a bit higher, it maybe will give me more gathers, but this normally works pretty good. So now I'm going to just sew a straight row of stitches, and I still have that heavier thread in my looper. See how nicely it starts gathering. So we can use this cover stitch side to gather fabric the same way as we did with the overlock. Only thing about the cover stitch side is that these gathers are not adjustable. Like in the overlock side, we can pull the needle threads. Cover stitch, we can't really adjust them. But we actually get a bit more gathers with the same settings in a cover stitch. And why is that? Well, it's just something to do with this location on the needles, that they are closer to the front set of feed dogs. So they kind of grab the fabric sooner and they make it a little bit better pleat. So see, we really get really nice pleats with this one. Again, now I'm at the edge of the fabric, so if I use the rules, I only have my stitch length the longest. I will loosen my needle tensions to 2, and then I just let it run off the edge without pulling. Just gonna go off the edge, and then I can cut my threads if I don't stab myself. So here we have nice little gathers, little Barbie skirt again, and underside, because I had my pretty thread in a looper, I get kind of decorative look on this one. For the next row, I'm gonna put the needle tensions back to 5, and I still want to have the same stitch length at 4, and then I will start on the fabric. Let me put my fabric underneath. So I'm gonna leave a little gap because I can't go right next to this other, and I want to leave little gaps anyway. That is where this narrower foot it will become handier, and if I have to sew the other side, I could get even closer because this side is very close to my needles. So important is that I don't have other pleats going on the pleats. So I want to keep the fabric flat in the front of it. So that's the reason I can't go very close. Let me move it even a little bit further out. There we go. So I'm just gonna go around and just try to keep that one straight, and I did not mark my lines, but if I had done a little mark, this would be the wrong side of the fabric, so that would make it a little bit easier for me to guide. I'm just gonna eyeballing it this time. You notice my second side, I had to go a bit slower, and you notice I didn't loosen my needle tensions. I'm kind of bad girl on that one. But here's my second row, and if I keep a little tuck this way, I have nice pleats between, sort of like it was smocked. Not smoked, but smocked. And then I could do one more row. So that way I can just to gather the fabric and make nice pleats. Baby Lock website under the projects. There is an older project, but there was a little girl's dress that the front bodice was all gathered this way. I can loosen my needle tension, run off the edge of the fabric. And again, I didn't mark these lines, so they're not perfectly straight and perfectly lined up, but that's the best I can do in the camera. I had done a little baby bonnet, but I'm not sure where it is, so I will show just a picture of that one because it's somewhere on the piles of my samples that I have.
Okay, let's move on to the next cover stitch, and this time I'm gonna go to do the white cover stitch. And it is very simple to go from the triple cover to the white cover, because all we have to do is to take the C2 needle, which is the center cover stitch needle. We'll remove that needle and the thread. So all we have are the 2 other needle threads and the looper thread. The settings are exactly the same. What can we do with this stitch? Well, here's some examples. Because we could do the cover hem, like I had done on the first sample, but we can also use it for decorative. So in this case, instead of using the triple cover, I had put a little bit darker, heavier thread in a looper on this really lightweight fabric, so it shows like a little shadow work that stitching shows underneath. On this next and the middle sample, this is from the heirloom baby quilt, where the yellow thread or the kind of gold color thread, this one is the looper thread that was used to join two laces together. It's actually done a couple times. So this piece and those two lace edges, they are not touching each other. There literally is a gap between. There's a little fagotin stitch on that one, done using with the water-soluble stabilizer. And there's also that's on that same baby quilt, a heart from the center, that the background, there's a little shadow work that I had done some cover stitching, and then finally I used the narrow cover stitch to attach it into the piece of fabric. And here a couple more, just kind of used the cover stitch, the white cover stitch on the needle side on this crisscross, and I had marked just the center section and then used the quilting guide for parallel lines. Finally, little sewing machine circles were sewn on the corners. And here's another pillow that was really using the same technique as on a previous sample for the shadow work, that I had put dark brown thread in a looper and then sewn on this really lightweight fabric. And when you put it behind the little white fabric on behind on that one, it looks like a little shadow work.
Okay, I'm gonna do some techniques with the white cover stitch, which is very similar to triple cover. If I compare on my quick reference chart, the triple cover and the white cover, the only difference is that I have removed one needle and the thread. So this case we will have the C1 and C3 needle. So that makes it a wider cover stitch. Later on we'll do some narrow cover stitches. But otherwise the settings are exactly the same. So how do I do that? Let me go ahead and take my handy screwdriver. And I will just take that center needle out. And I have it still threaded so that way it won't stop a drop inside the machine. And then I will snip my thread on the top and pull the thread. And I usually like to cut the threads on the top, pull it through the machine. And then important thing is that I also will take and wind that thread tail onto the back to the spool, because if I leave it just tangling up, it's gonna get caught up with those other spools. So I can put this spool back in its place, but as long as my thread is not hanging on the top of the antenna. So now I'm all ready to go for this stitching. So I'll put back my difference of feet to end, because that was my test that I had done in the past. And I will put my stitch needle tension back to 5. And then I'm going to just this time, let's do some other foot. I kind of like using these different feet. I could use a standard foot, the narrow foot, or the clear. Oh, yeah, actually clear, or this one is the best. Standard would work too, but I kind of like to have a little bit more visibility for my next technique. So I had changed my settings by threading on my machine. So let me just do a quick run on, make sure that everything looks good. Again, I can go off the edge, lengthen the stitch length, and then also loosen my tensions, and I can go off the edge. So I will still get that chain. If I don't loosen the tension with the white cover stitch, you'll tend to get really bad sounds on the machine. So that little trick will really help on getting those that tail to be worked nicely. So now I have, actually I had still a very long stitch length on this one, but I can still check that, yeah, after I threaded my machine, everything looks good, but also I got my threads kind of back on the top of the surface, because I changed the looper thread.
For the sample 4, we will do a hem. This time I'm going to have a woven fabric. So again, doesn't matter whether it is knit or woven. But this time we're going to go on a circle. Then that is more kind of a real application if we are doing a t-shirt or rehemming a shirt. So this could be like a sort of sleeve. So I have sewn with the 3-thread overlock or 2-thread overlock or seam on this one, and press the hem under. So I'm going to show the technique how we can go around this one, because whenever we are stitching just from the start and the beginning of those earlier samples, my needle threads are wrapped around the looper. So I'll show a little trick on how we get to start on inside the hem, and then also how we can finish it without the because coming off the edge, because that's a question I often get. Well, how do I do the hemming in a circle on the round? And I have a little separate handout, usually on a class that I keep for that one. And here's the picture of that one. This came from the Babylock Australia website. So they have really good handout on this one. They had used a cover stitch only machine on this one. So really the same technique works with the cover stitch only and also the 8-thread machines. So I'll be demonstrating this one on the machine, but here's all the steps on a handout, but that can be downloaded from the Babylock Australia website under the techniques.
So now, what would I do with this one? I could do the similar kind of things that I did in the past. I could use it for decorative, I could use it for hemming. And this time I'm going to use it for hemming. But instead of just to do a piece, I have made it into a loop, a tube, because this is really often when we do a hem. It might be a sort of skirt or the sleeve. This could be a kind of hem of the sleeve. Can be knit fabric or can be woven fabric. And the question now is, well, how do I get this fabric underneath the foot and then off the without cutting my threads too short or running off the edge, because the chain is sort of held up with the stitches. So here's the couple tips in this one. I'm gonna first make sure that all my threads are on the top side. Because I did this tail, now my needle threads are wrapped around the looper. So I could do my earlier trick where I have my presser foot up, needles all the way up, then I go backwards half a turn, needle down, pull it back so I can pull those needle threads, and then I'll rotate it towards me to lift the needles back up, and I can pull those needle threads separate from the bottom. So now I have my threads separated, so I could put my fabric underneath. Well, this is the time again that I would need to sew it from the top side. So again, my little handy seam guide would be helpful. So let me do that. Put this one on, and I'll show you again the lineup. So I like using the fabric guide on stitching this kind of hems. I've done the same way. In this case, I just sewed with the overlock stitch. I sewed a little seam, pretend that was my hem, my sleeve seam, and then I pressed the hem underneath. And little tip also when pressing that hem underneath is that if you flip that Serger stitch, I kind of made like a little flip that on one side the seam goes towards me, on the hem side it goes away from me. So when I flip it over, those seams are nestled, so I don't have such a bulky seam to go over. So that's just a little tip on anytime when you press those hems. Okay, so let me just do kind of finger tighten. Again, real project, I would use a screwdriver. And the same way as I did on my first sample, I'm gonna use my sleeve or that hem. I'm gonna see, this is where I'd like my stitches to go. Use my knee lever to lower the presser foot there. So now I can line up my fabric guide against that edge. Let me see if I'm gonna put it straight in there. I'm doing a side on here. I'm not sitting right in front of the machine. So now I have it lined up. So I'm gonna do the same as in the past. I will flip up my fabric so that I have the right side on the top, and like on one of the other classes we did earlier, I think it was number 2 class, how to sew on a tube. I want to have the tube on top of the fabric, so that way I don't accidentally sew the bottom side on the seam. Also, I don't like to start right on that heavier seam. I'll start either a little bit before or a little bit after. So I'm going to start a little bit after this time. It's just easier because we have to do a little overlap on it. That way, so I don't have all those stitches on the same time as I have all that previous seam. Again, so I just lower my presser foot there. Love using that knee lever. And then I will be stitching and keeping that hem as on the guide, just to do a little bit at a time. That's going around. just to kind of, this is where really that hem guide is handy. I have to kind of watch that I don't catch that other side. That's why I like to have that hem on the sleeve on the top side. And I'm approaching that other end. That's pretty much would be like the size of an adult sleeve. So this time now I see my threads. Well, one thing I had not mentioned in the past is that these stitches do come apart easy if we don't secure at the end that we finish the stitching. The beginning is sort of kind of locked in place already, but the ending part we need to lock in place. So beginning part, I can cut these threads because I'm gonna stitch over. So I will just clip my needle threads on top side and then my looper thread from the bottom side. So I have neat edges there. So now I'm gonna sew and line up my needle threads to match with those two earlier needle threads. That's the reason I want to have a foot that I can see better. Clear foot and the open toe are the best. We could use the standard foot or the narrow foot and use those markings on the toe. But this one just gives me a little bit extra visibility, and I need all the help as I can because I'm looking on the side in here when I'm stitching in a camera. So I'm using first the toes, the markings to line up with my needle threads, and then I can kind of look inside the foot on this case that I can see that I'll be lining up pretty good my previous stitching. There we go. And I will do a little bit of an overlap there. So now I'm just going to rotate my hand wheel that my needles are all the way up, and I was still rotating towards me. So how do I get this one out, because it's stuck there now and I don't want to really sew off the edge. So here's the little trick. I'm gonna take either that little screwdriver, or I like using my little snips. I have my pressure foot up, and then I will put my tool, whatever it is, screwdriver or snips, behind the needles, kind of just underneath the foot behind the needles, and I will pull these needle threads towards me. So I just pull a loop. Kind of, I'm gonna pull a few inches, and because I use snips, I can cut this tail. So I have just cut those loops. And then I'll take my piece of fabric and gently pull it towards back. See, I'm just gonna pulling it towards the back, try to keep my hands away. And then I'm gonna pinch between, minute I get it behind the foot, I'm gonna pinch the between in here that I don't pull those looper thread. And then I can snip that last remaining looper thread. So what happened in here, I got my needle threads pulled underneath, and I almost got them lined up. Not my best stitching. But then underneath, now these threads are all secured because the way we pulled those needle threads. I still tend to, instead of just cutting these ones, I will tie these ones into a knot. I tend to often overkill things a little bit. I'll do maybe a little double knot, and you could put seam sealant, that's another option, or weave it in. But if I do a double knot, and then I can just to clip those thread tails about like maybe 1/4 inch. So that is all secured this time. So that is how we can start and stop in the middle of the fabric. And this technique will work with any of these cover stitches. It doesn't matter if I have a triple cover, wide cover, or narrow cover. There's just another use for this stitch. And I could have used the triple cover or the narrow cover on this one. But this pillow top, I have sewn the white cover stitches just on a crisscross on really thin fabric, organdy. So that is how the fabric would look on the wrong side. So it's just a thin fabric, so you see through. And on my pillow, I use a really dark brown thread for the looper, and then I have a tan threads for the needles. And I shorten my stitch length very closely, so that way I get a little shadow effect. And this one, I had used all black threads. So the looper thread, I had used a little bit heavy, like 12 weight cotton thread on this one. And then when I put it over top of the light color fabric, I get little shadow effects. So that is just the kind of other, we can use that the same way as the decorative stitching as we did some of the earlier samples. And on this little baby blanket, I had used for the same shadow effect, just a triple cover. So I had a light blue thread in the looper and the 3 needles. And that showed a couple rows of stitches, and then it's behind the white fabric or lining fabric, so it kind of gives a little shadow effect look on those stitches. And another technique, between these laces, those 3 strips of lace on both sides, that one is this white cover stitch that looks like it's been stitched on air. However, there was a help of a water-soluble stabilizer that these 2 laces were lined up and then joined between. So that is how I got those, looks like a little fagot in between. And then finally on the center part of this one, behind the heart, you see a little bit of a shadow. Well, the heart background was to stitch with the cover stitches first with a heavier kind of darker thread, and then it was appliqué kind of as a shadow applique or reverse applique kind of thing using the narrow cover stitch. So those stitches sadly are cover stitches, they are not done in a sewing machine, that's all done in a serger.
We can also attach elastic with the cover stitch, and this time, yes, we're going to be using the elastic foot. And on this one, instead of now using the most right side of this foot for the lining up, we're going to be using the cover stitch section. So I could have on this sample use a narrow cover or triple cover or the wide cover. So really doesn't matter which cover stitch I'm using. But the same note as I had on the overlock side when attaching elastic is to have your stitch length as long as possible. That's ways if you have too short stitch length, it will kind of fight the elastic to be relaxed. And we will just weave the elastic the same way under the foot, which is guided more towards on the left side on there. And then I have a little lightweight fabric and a kind of a lace elastic. I'll do a demonstration, but we can also do it on a woven fabric. So I'll show those samples then when I do my live demo.
Okay, for the next technique, let's use the cover stitch to put the lace. On this little sample, I had used a narrow cover stitch, which most likely would be on a lingerie fabric. That would be the better option. I'm going to leave my white cover on this one. Again, really, any of these cover stitches, this technique would work. But I had done the same on some time earlier. Let's see if I can get my lights in here. So I have done it on a woven fabric. And I had used a little bit heavier lace on that one. So on the woven fabric, I just folded the top edge under, and that raw edge is now covered with the elastic, and it's being gathered at the same time. So how to put the elastic with the serger? Well, we're gonna use that elastic foot as we did with the overlock side, and the same way. So let me take my open toe foot out. The same way, it's easier to put this elastic in the foot whenever the foot's not in the machine. And as a reminder, the elastic goes between, let's see if I can get my fingers out of the way, between that little metal bar and the roller. So if I hold my foot kind of on my left hand, so that I'm kind of holding it from the behind, and with my thumb, I will lift it up the toe. I will release this roller so that I can get the elastic underneath. And with my right hand, I will take my elastic, and this is going to have a pretty elastic, so I'm going to put the right side up, and I'm just going to slide that little loop on that metal bar, close the tip. And now I need to make sure that my elastic is underneath my chain needles. So I need to be at least that part that I will see it on that hole. Again, this is one of those feet that does not have that little slit. So we need to make sure that our needle threads are not wrapped around the loop. Well, this elastic is quite a bit wider, what I had used the last time. So I will use my handy screwdriver and adjust the guide so that it will just hold this elastic nicely in place. I will get it eventually. There we go. And now I'm gonna put this one into the machine. As with always when sewing on elastic, we want to have the stitch length to be the longest. So I put it all the way to 4. And you could also use your differential feet to gather the fabric if needed. But my fabric this time is very, very flimsy. It's kind of like that underwear, and I have black one, kind of white looking underwear here. And I'm just going to put it underneath. So you see that often on ladies' slips or maybe even panties or night clothing. So I'm just going to put my fabric underneath. And if it was right and wrong, I would put the right side up this case because my lace is pretty right side up. And again, long stitch length, and then I have this time with the white cover stitch, I could use the narrow one or the triple on this one also. So now all I have to do is just to stitch, and I have a little adjustment on this one, lefty loosey, righty tighty. If it looks like it's gathering too much, I can loosen it a little bit. It's a very flimsy elastic, so it kind of wants to wiggle around a little bit inside the foot in there. Yeah, I need to loosen the tension it just a little bit because this is a very, very lightweight elastic and also fabric. So there we go. Let me just get that one out of the way. There we go. Loosen my needle tension to 2 and just run off the edge. Oh, got lots of gathers this time. And I have my little threads caught a bit. So here I have attached my elastic on the top of the fabric. And then I could go with the scissors and trim off this excess because this fabric won't fray. On my woven fabrics, I had folded the edge under so that way it was all covered with the stitching. And then on that case, I put my elastic on the underside.
Sample number 6 is going to be a technique to attach a ribbon with the cover stitch. And the ribbon I'm using on a sample is a 3/8 inch wide ribbon, so the wide cover stitch works perfectly. Other option, I could use the triple cover. If my ribbon is narrower, like a 1/4 inch wide, then I would use the narrow cover stitch or the chain stitch for that one. And the best foot for to use this one, we could use the lace applicator foot because it has a nice guide. Or then we could also use the standard foot that comes with the Triumph and Ovation. This foot has an extra slot for tape. So that way I don't have to cut my ribbon. It will just keep it right in a right spot in there. I just have to cut my fabric. This foot can be added for all the other 8-thread Sergers. So even though all the other like Accolade, Evolution and Evolve, they don't have this extra slot, but this foot can be added for those. It really works the best. But other option is to use the lace applicator foot.
Okay, for the next technique, I'm going to use this white cover stitch to attach ribbon. And on this Serger bag, that was our class we had done quite some time ago, this little ribbons, actually the ribbon had this black and white embroidery in the middle already. But you kind of see the 2 straight lines around it. That was the cover stitch white that was used to attach that one. This one was at Baby Lilo convention, the class that we had. And that was used in the Ovation at the time. That's when the Ovations were introduced. So this one, that crow crane ribbon between those seams on this ruffled pocket, they were all attached using this technique. And here's my little sample. So I have used just a crow crane ribbon, and I had white thread in the needles, but if I had red on one and blue on other, you wouldn't even see those threads. And then I just had the loop thread underneath there. So I have a yellow 3/8 inch wide crow crane ribbon. That works great with the white cover. If I had a narrow ribbon, I could use the chain stitch or I could use the narrow cover stitch. So, or this one I could also use a triple cover if I wanted 3 rows of stitches to show. So I have 2 options for the feet, because I could use the standard foot and just eyeball it, but I like to use something with the guide. So one option would be to use the lace applicator foot. So if I line up my ribbon so that I see the ribbon in the middle in that needle openings, and then I can adjust the guide so that I would move the guide so that will be keeping my edge nicely flat. My other option is on Triumph and Ovation, the standard foot, we have extra holes in the middle. With all our standard feet, all the machines, we have a hole in the front. but that's a bit wider one. But this one in the middle is perfect for the 3/8 inch ribbon. So if I can just put this one on that. All the other 8-thread sergers that they don't have these extra slots. However, you can add this foot for your Evolution, Evolve, or Accolade machines. So that way you'll have this one, this guide. I like using this one because I don't need to do any adjustments on that little guide like I would have to do it on my lace applicator foot. And then I have my fabric wherever I want my stitches to go. I will just put it underneath. And we're gonna try to see if we can have a line up between those lines in there. So now all I have to do is cut the fabric. I don't want to do anything with the ribbon because the foot will keep it in place. And I had put my stitch length back to 3 and I put my tension back to 5 because I had used it for doing the chaining off earlier. See, all I have to do is just to cut the fabric. The ribbon will just stay on its own there. So here is my ribbon attached with the Serger cover stitch, and I had a dark gray thread in a loopers and needles, so just perfectly lined up. In this little pillow, that 1/4 inch white silk ribbon was attached with the Serger cover stitch, but because this ribbon was narrow, I used a narrow cover stitch instead. And on this one, these pieces, so the lace and the entredot or the bridging, they were joined together first with the the rolled hem, and then I attached that one onto this white fabric with that narrow cover stitch.
Yeah, here's one more technique with the white cover. Again, another option could be the triple cover. This technique will not work with the narrow cover, so it has to be either the white cover stitch or triple cover. We can make belt loops, and if you wonder why would I want to make belt loops, well, I actually had used one on my sample with the denim, because that's how you if you look the denim, the jeans, that's how they normally have those belt loops done. But we can do really nice straps and different kinds of ribbons that way. And there are two sizes of the belt loop binder attachments. The wider one, the finished belt loop will be, or the strip of fabric will be just wider. The narrow one makes it little narrow ones. So they are very easy to use. So I'll do a little demo on that one. But what we can use those ones? Well, here are some examples. I had used a wider version on the belt loop binder attachments, and then sewn this strips of fabric, which I then wove on top of the black and white fabric, and they are all attached just with a little sewing machine, just a little single stitch on the middle of it. But these are belt loop binder attachments. It's a great way to use button loops or just little straps. The picture on the left, I just put this in here. That was really for the previous sample, but this is when I had used the white cover stitch to attach the ribbon. Yes, this black and white ribbon, the black piece is part of the ribbon, but you're barely gonna see those needle threads on that white fabric.
Okay, for the next technique, what I'm using the white cover stitch, my other option would be to use the triple cover. This technique won't work well with the narrow cover because it's just too narrow to really be secure. So either the white cover or triple cover. And I'm gonna do pelt loops. You kind of wonder, what would I do pelt loops for? Well, they can be used for all kinds of different applications. So as one example, I had used belt loops. These are wider belt loops, and they're woven on top of this other fabric. And then I just used a sewing machine with a little decorative stitch to attach them in the middle. But these are Serger belt loops done with the white cover. On this other bag, the button loop, because I used the last pattern, was done using that same technique. And you can see my top stitching on my back is done with the white cover with the heavier thread in the loop. There are two belt loop binder attachments, and these ones will work on all 8-thread and also the cover stitch machines, and also you can use them with the chassicot machine too. They do have lots of adjustments. They kind of have, I can see different places for screws, because depending on what foot I'm using and what machine, I may have to adjust this a little bit on a location. The difference between these two is it's just that the wider one makes a wider finish cover stitch and the narrow makes a narrower. I'm going to use the narrower one because that is the width of the fabric that I had cut for me. So the fabric width needs to be the width that will fit on this one. The little booklet that comes with the foot, that has the instructions for how wide to cut these strips. One little tip, if you cut it on bias on very stretchy fabric, you may want to cut it a tad wider so that whenever it stretches, it will not stretch out of shape. So the way these ones go in, we're going to be using these white knobs. And by the way, if you have lost your knobs or ever lose them, they are available to purchase as separate items. We normally carry them in a shop. And they will get mounted the same way as we were using that the fabric guide earlier. So just loosely put those screws in place. And this way, now I'm using the standard foot. So this tip really nicely lines up right in front of the foot. I don't want my foot, whenever my foot's down, be on top of it, but I don't want to have too big gap either. That is why we have those adjustment screws. Because if I was using for maybe this narrower cover foot, it is quite a bit shorter. So if I line up where my needles would be going, it's quite a bit shorter. So I would most likely need to move those screws, loosen the screws and move this guide a bit closer. So depending on what foot you use and what machine, you may have to adjust those. The tip I want to line up, I'm looking those 3 notches again in there because they will line up with my needles. So I have the most left, and then the third from the left is going to be where my needles are. So I'm going to try to line it up pretty centered. And I normally take a little extra piece of fabric and do a test because I can eyeball it close, but I may not get it exactly. So that way I can do a little adjustment. And I have a strip of fabric. This is just cotton fabric in this case. And I cut a little point. And we'll go right side up onto this binder attachment. And I'll just weave it in. You can use the your screwdriver or tweezers just to get it underneath the needles. Excuse me. I'm going to put it just right underneath the needles, and then I will lower my pressure foot down. And then all I have to do is just to make sure that this fabric stays on that guide. So I'm not going to really hold it. I may, especially if my fabric is a bit wider, like this one is a little bit wider than the guide is, I just gently put my finger on top on this guide, and that way I can just hold it there. Just put my finger a little bit there, and then I just stitch. What this binder does, it folds those raw edges under, and my cover stitch looper side will just nicely cover. And let me shorten the stitch length to about 2.5, so it kind of covers it a little bit better, those raw edges. And now that I'm finished them, I'm going to lengthen my stitch length, loosen my needle tensions so I can run off the edge. That way my little chain doesn't break. And even with my eyeballing, I got them pretty lined up. I could maybe move it just a little bit towards left because they were just one side was not exactly in the middle. But that's why I always do a test. So top side I have my needle thread showing, underside I have my looper covering up on those raw edges that they were nicely folded together. So again, I could use the triple cover or the wide cover, but not the narrow cover. Okay, here's some examples of the scraps that I have done, the leftovers. The top one, this is actually denim. So that, if you look at store-made jeans, you normally see that that's how they made those belt loops. This one I had used a triple cover. Some of the other ones I used a wide cover, and there's a triple cover. And then I had also in this one, couple samples. This is a very, very flimsy, stretchy fabric. So I had cut a strip across the bolt. So yep, we can also do them with the stretchy fabric, and because of the cover stitch, It is a stretchy, so that'll work great for little straps if you want to do for your swimwear. And this one is a little scrap that they left over where I had put an elastic inside. So I had done clothing that the shoulder straps were done this way. And this one you can see that was my test. Whenever I put the elastic inside, I needed to cut my fabric a little bit wider because this I had cut it for the width what I had used on without the elastic when it worked great. But when I put the elastic, it was not wide enough. So that's why again I had done a test, and then my real garment I made it a bit wider. In this case, I can't use an elastic foot. I still use the standard foot, and I had put the elastic kind of underneath. So if my fabric goes on top, my elastic was under. And the minute I got it caught on my needles, then I just manually held that elastic and kept it on under the tension while it was stitching.